It has long been the boast of our age that never before in the history of man has there been so much knowledge, so much enlightenment, so much advance in the powers and prospects of human life. On every side we are told of new discoveries, new inventions, new interpretations of the universe, and new applications of science to the needs and pleasures of society. We are bidden to look back upon the ages of faith as ages of darkness, and to congratulate ourselves that the mists of superstition have been dispelled, leaving the sun of truth to shine upon a clearer day. To many minds this conviction has become almost an instinct, and it is repeated with such frequency and with such emphasis that to doubt it seems to require more courage than to affirm it. And yet beneath this chorus of triumph there lies a certain uneasiness, a dim but persistent question which refuses to be silenced. If indeed the old faith is gone, if religion is but a dream of the past, what is it that has taken its place? Have the sciences of matter and of life furnished us with a moral substitute equal to the weight of the one they have displaced? Has the discovery of the origins of species, or the deciphering of the motions of atoms, given to man a sufficient answer to the problems of conscience, of duty, of sorrow, and of death? These questions are not the idle play of speculative curiosity. They are the most practical of all questions, for they touch not the fortunes of a party or a nation, but the destiny of mankind itself. They press upon the heart of every thoughtful man and woman, for they ask whether life itself has meaning, or is but an accident of blind forces, whether it is a school of discipline or a pageant of illusions, whether it is a gift to be cherished or a burden to be endured. It is to this question that the following pages are directed. The title chosen, Is Life Worth Living?, is no paradox invented to arrest attention. It expresses the genuine issue which the collapse of faith has brought before us. If life be not more than a sum of sensations, if man be but a transient phenomenon of matter, if his loves and labors perish with his breath, then the verdict of reason cannot be far removed from despair. The older ages, whatever their errors, were never haunted by this ghost of nothingness. However mistaken their creeds may now appear, those creeds gave them a sense of purpose and of permanence. They bound man to the eternal, and in that bond they found strength to suffer and to act. But we, having unbound ourselves, must ask whither we are drifting, and whether the liberty we boast has not been purchased by the loss of all direction. The writer who undertakes such a task must do so with humility, and yet with determination. He must neither flatter the prejudices of the devout nor the complacency of the skeptic. He must listen to the voices of science and philosophy, but also to the voice of the human heart. He must trace the arguments of the materialist to their end, and he must set them side by side with the experiences of life which no theory can extinguish. He must remember that the question is not one of dialectics alone, but of existence itself. If a system of thought ends by convincing us that duty is a dream and hope a delusion, then however ingenious it may be, it is a system that condemns life itself, and its triumph is but a more polished form of suicide. When we turn to the age in which this inquiry is made, we find ample reason for its urgency. Never before has religious authority been subjected to such searching criticism. The discoveries of geology have stretched the years of the earth into abysses that make the Mosaic chronology appear a child's tale. The doctrine of evolution has traced the frame of man to kinship with the brute. The study of comparative religions has placed Christianity in a line with faiths once called barbarous. The criticism of Scripture has torn away the veil of sanctity from texts once deemed the very voice of God. These movements have not been confined to a few isolated thinkers. They have penetrated the atmosphere of education, of journalism, of conversation. They have become the commonplaces of our cultured classes. To confess doubt is no longer to risk censure, but rather to win the applause of courage. The fashionable assumption is that belief has become impossible and that only those cling to it who are either ignorant or insincere. And yet, it is precisely among these enlightened circles that the sense of emptiness has been most keenly felt. The very men who have cast away the creed of their fathers are the first to confess that life without it seems robbed of its crown. They will tell you with candor that the hope of immortality is gone, that prayer is an illusion, that the universe is indifferent to our fate. They will say that the earth is but a speck in infinite space, and man but an insect crawling for a moment on its surface. They will confess that duty is no longer a command, but at best a convenience, that virtue is but another name for social expediency, and that the loftiest poetry of religion is but the dream of a race unwilling to face the abyss. And yet, having said this, they will turn again to their pursuits of pleasure, of wealth, of reputation, and they will attempt to stifle the whisper of despair by the noise of business and the excitements of amusement. But can this suffice? Can life indeed be lived upon such terms? Is it possible for the mind of man to rest satisfied with a creed that makes him the sport of atoms, or with a hope that dies upon the grave? Is it possible to preserve morality when its root in the eternal has been cut away, or to preserve happiness when its meaning has been denied? These are the questions which, whether we will or not, press upon us. We may attempt to evade them, but they return. We may drown them for an hour, but they rise again in the silence of the night and in the presence of death. The problem of faith is the problem of life itself. I do not disguise from myself that many readers will approach this subject with impatience. They will say the question is idle, that life is what it is, and that to ask whether it is worth living is to trifle with words. But such impatience is itself a confession, for beneath it lies the fear of facing the conclusion to which unbelief is tending. The Epicurean of old frankly confessed that since life had no meaning, the wise man should eat and drink, for tomorrow he dies. Our modern unbelief is less courageous. It dares not avow the sterility to which it leads. It prefers to speak in vague terms of progress, of humanity, of culture, and to hide its bankruptcy beneath noble phrases. But words cannot change realities, and progress without a goal, humanity without a destiny, culture without truth are but painted masks upon the skeleton of despair. It is not my purpose to argue for any particular theology, nor to defend every dogma that has been maintained in the name of religion. My concern is with the great question in its simplest form. If the belief in God and in immortality is a delusion, then let us see honestly what remains. If morality, poetry, love, and hope can survive such a loss, then let us know it. If on the other hand they cannot, then let us confess that in abandoning faith we have abandoned life's very worth. The issue is clear, and no dialectic skill can alter it. Either man is more than dust, or he is less than his own heart demands. Either the soul has a when we turn from the general mood of our time to the precise influences that have wrought the change in belief. It becomes at once apparent that they are many and powerful. Religion, once enthroned as the unchallenged sovereign of human thought, has been compelled to defend her title at every point. Her foundations have been probed by science, her sanctions examined by philosophy, her sacred books treated with the same scrutiny as common records, and her authority measured by the standard of human reason. The very air of modern culture has grown heavy with criticism, and faith, once instinctive, has become for multitudes a memory rather than a conviction. The progress of physical science has been the most obvious agent in this transformation. In former ages the universe was conceived as a vast theater in which God displayed his wisdom and power, and man stood in the center as the heir of creation. The heavens declared the glory of God, and the earth bore witness to his providence. But the discoveries of astronomy have extended the bounds of space until our planet shrinks into a speck, and the imagination is bewildered by systems and galaxies beyond number. The revelations of geology have opened abysses of time that make the chronology of Moses seem but the measure of a dream. The doctrine of evolution has traced the frame of man through long processes of development from lower forms of life, until the descent of the soul itself is called into question. And thus, where faith once saw the Creator and the Father, science now points to forces and laws indifferent to our prayers, blind to our sorrows, and silent to our hopes. Yet it is not science alone that has undermined belief. Philosophy, too, has had its share in the assault. The German thinkers, with their dialectics and their criticism of knowledge, have shaken the trust that men once placed in the power of reason to apprehend the divine. If all our conceptions are but phenomena of mind, if truth itself is relative to the faculties that perceive it, then revelation becomes a shadow and certainty a word without meaning. The very notion of the supernatural is explained away as an inheritance from savage imaginations, and the God of conscience is dismissed as an anthropomorphic dream. Nor must we forget the influence of historical research and comparative religion. The sacred books of the Hebrews have been laid beside the legends of Babylon and the hymns of India, and scholars have traced analogies that make revelation appear but a stage in the development of human myth. The miracles of the Gospels have been sifted as the marvels of other faiths have been sifted, and the conclusion presented to the world is that Christianity is but the highest flower of the religious instinct, not the intrusion of God into history. What was once held as unique is now regarded as typical, and what was once divine is now counted as human. The effect of these influences has been to loosen in countless minds the grasp of faith. Christianity, which once held not only the altar, but the conscience, the intellect, and the imagination of Europe, is now, in the view of many, one creed among many, venerable indeed, but without authority. Its dogmas are treated as opinions, its sanctions as traditions, its morality as a convention. The certainty of immortality has been exchanged for the suspicion of extinction, and the providence of God has given way to the reign of chance, or the mechanism of law. But the loss of belief is not a matter that concerns theology only, it reaches into the whole fabric of life. For when faith in God declines, the foundations of morality and of society tremble with it. In the older ages, duty had the sanction of eternity, the conscience spoke with the authority of heaven, sacrifice was justified by hope. Men were able to endure poverty, suffering, and persecution, because they believed that their reward was not in this world, but in another. The heroism of the martyr, the patience of the poor, the purity of the saint, were all sustained by the conviction that God saw and that eternity would vindicate. Take away this conviction, and what remains? Duty becomes but a word for social convenience, morality a calculation of pleasures and pains, virtue a convention established by the majority. The motive is weakened, the authority is dissolved, and the noblest acts of man are robbed of their justification. It is this void, moral and social, that our modern prophets of unbelief strive to deny, but which their lives and words perpetually betray. They assure us that man can live nobly without religion, that science and culture can inspire as lofty an ideal as ever faith supplied, that humanity itself is the new deity whose service shall replace the worship of heaven. They write of the religion of the future, a religion without dogma and without God, in which love of truth and love of man shall unite to form a new morality. They promise us that the downfall of Christianity will not be the downfall of virtue, but the dawn of a nobler day. Let us examine these claims, for on them hangs the worth of life in an unbelieving age. If it be true that morality can rest upon utility, that culture can give inspiration, that progress can provide purpose, then perhaps the collapse of faith is not fatal. But if these substitutes prove hollow, then the fall of religion is the fall of life's very meaning. Consider first the doctrine that morality may be maintained without God. We are told that virtue is useful, that honesty promotes the welfare of society, that temperance and purity strengthen the individual, and that justice is but enlightened self-interest. Therefore, it is said, religion is needless to enforce what reason already commends. Yet this account ignores the deeper motives of the human heart. For the question is not whether virtue is useful, but why a man should sacrifice himself for virtue when the sacrifice brings no reward. Utility may explain why society esteems justice, but it cannot explain why the individual should practice justice at his own cost. If life ends in death, if the grave is the end of all, what rational inducement has the man to forego pleasure, to embrace suffering, to resist temptation? Philosophy may talk of duty, but stripped of eternity, duty becomes a shadow. The conscience may still speak, but it speaks now as an instinct, not as the voice of God. And what is an instinct but a survival of habits, liable to change as conditions alter, and destined to perish when the conditions that produced it are gone? Nor is the case better when we turn to culture as a substitute for faith. The poets and philosophers of our age have often told us that beauty and art can ennoble life, that literature and science can fill the void which religion has left. They assure us that in the contemplation of truth and the creation of beauty the human spirit finds its true vocation. But how hollow is this consolation when stripped of its rhetoric? For beauty is but a passing impression upon the senses, and science is but a record of phenomena. The noblest poetry fades with the mood. The grandest theory of science is subject to revision. They may charm the leisure of the cultivated, but what solace do they bring to the poor, to the mourner, to the dying? What comfort does art yield to the mother bending over her dead child, or science to the sufferer wasted with disease? Religion had an answer. It spoke of God who loved, of immortality that restored, of heaven where tears should be wiped away. Culture is dumb before such trials, and its silence is the measure of its insufficiency. The prophets of progress tell us with confidence that humanity itself is the object of our devotion, and that the service of man shall replace the service of God. We are to work for the race, to labor for future generations, to sacrifice ourselves for the advancement of mankind. This is the creed proclaimed as the new gospel, and to many generous spirits it has the sound of nobility. But when examined, it proves to be built upon air. For why should I sacrifice myself for the race if I myself am nothing, if my consciousness perishes with my body, if no eternal principle gives dignity to my acts? To labor for posterity may please the imagination, but what is posterity to me if I am not? If the future has no relation to the eternal, then it is but a fleeting moment succeeding my fleeting moment, and my sacrifice is swallowed up in nothingness. Religion could justify self-sacrifice, for it declared that in serving man we were serving God, and that our labor entered into eternity. But secular progress can give no such assurance. It bids me toil for ends I shall never see, for men who will forget me, for a world that itself is drifting toward extinction. And when reason presses these conclusions, the gospel of humanity collapses into the confession that each man must live for himself, and that beyond his pleasure and his pain there is nothing worth considering. Thus we see that the substitutes for religion fail to fill the void it has left. Morality without God loses its authority, culture without faith loses its consolation, progress without eternity loses its purpose. The collapse of belief is therefore not merely a change of opinion, but a revolution in the meaning of life. It touches alike the loftiest aspirations and the humblest duties. It undermines the heroism of the martyr and the patience of the poor, the devotion of the patriot and the purity of the home. It robs death of its dignity and life of its crown. And though men may disguise this conclusion beneath phrases of optimism, though they may talk of humanity, of truth, of beauty. Yet the heart knows the hollowness of the phrases, and the conscience feels the chill of despair. It is one thing to declare that religion is gone, it is another to show that life can retain its worth without it. Those who exult in the decline of faith are not content merely to proclaim a negative. They endeavor to persuade us that the void has been filled, that the place once occupied by God is now nobly held by other powers, that the fountains of meaning have not dried but only changed their channels. And thus we hear on every side of new religions, of substitutes for Christianity, of inspirations drawn from art, from philosophy, from science, from human progress. The promise is that though the cross be lowered, the world shall not sit in darkness, that though the churches be emptied, the temple of humanity shall be crowded, that though immortality be renounced, life shall yet glow with unquenched brightness. It is necessary, therefore, to examine these pretended sources of strength, to ask whether they can indeed yield what is claimed, whether they can sustain the burden which faith so long bore, whether they can give to man that sense of dignity, of direction, and of destiny which the old religion once conferred. Art is often named as the first of these new divinities. Men are told that in the contemplation of beauty, in the creations of poetry, in the harmonies of music, in the majesty of architecture and painting, they will find a sanctuary as inspiring as any church, a consolation as deep as any creed. We are reminded that beauty has a power to elevate, that it refines the senses, that it stirs emotions allied to reverence, that it links the mind with the eternal through form and color and sound. But let us not be deceived by the splendor of phrases. Art has never in any age been sufficient as a moral guide. It charms, it excites, it intoxicates, but it does not command. The very same powers which fill one heart with aspiration may inflame another with passion. The same sculpture that to one man speaks of the divine may to another speak of lust. The same music that elevates the devout may also intoxicate the sensual. Beauty in itself is indifferent. It has no law but its own, no command but the delight it gives. It is a stream reflecting heaven or hell according to the clouds that pass above it. To seek in it the authority of duty is to lean on a reed that bends with every wind. The saint has never been bred by art alone, and the martyr has never gone to the stake for beauty's sake. Religion may employ art as her handmaid, but art unaided can never wear the crown of religion. Philosophy, we are told, may give what art cannot. The thinkers assure us that in speculation upon existence, in the pursuit of truth for its own sake, the soul finds a satisfaction equal to that which faith once gave. Knowledge, they say, is itself the highest good, and the delight of the intellect in discovering law and order is the noblest of pleasures. Yet here again we are mocked with words, for philosophy has never spoken with one voice. The systems of the wise contradict each other with as much vigor as the creeds of the devout. What one age pronounces as certainty another treats as folly. And even if philosophy could give truth, what would such truth avail if it were stripped of moral sanction and eternal hope? To know that the universe is a machine of atoms, to know that thought is but a movement of molecules, to know that all the glories of the mind are but eddies in the stream of matter. Such knowledge, if it be truth, does not elevate but depresses. It takes away the dignity of the soul. It reduces the hero to a phantom, the saint to a secretion, the poet to a vibration. Knowledge may amuse the leisure of the learned, but it does not strengthen the will of the sufferer. It does not console the mourner. It does not nerve the martyr. Philosophy without God is a lamp without oil. It may glow for a moment, but it sinks into darkness when the hour of trial comes. Then we are told of progress, of humanity, of the religion of the future in which man shall worship himself. The prophets of this gospel assure us that though immortality be denied, though God be forgotten, the race shall advance, and the individual shall find meaning in laboring for the generations to come. Humanity is the new divinity, and progress the new revelation. At first sight there is a grandeur in the thought. To work not for self but for mankind, to sacrifice the present to the future, to lose the individual in the great stream of the race. This seems noble, this seems to give scope for the loftiest heroism, but when examined closely, the dream dissolves. For what is this humanity for which I am to sacrifice myself? It is but a collection of individuals like myself, born to toil and to perish. The generations for whom I labor will themselves vanish, and the future to which I look forward will in its turn be swallowed in oblivion. If the race has no eternal destiny, if it is but a bubble on the stream of time, then to labor for it is to build castles upon sand. My sacrifice has no meaning, when both I and those for whom I sacrifice are alike destined for extinction. Religion could justify such sacrifice, for it declared that in serving man I was serving God, that in laboring for the race I was laboring for eternity. But secular humanism can give no such assurance. It bids me toil for ends I shall never see, for men who will forget me, for a world drifting toward annihilation. It may stimulate for a moment the generous emotions, but when reason presses its conclusions the inspiration dies, and the heart is left desolate. Consider further that this gospel of humanity is preached by those who at the same time deny the authority of conscience. If morality is but a convention, if duty is but a habit, then why should I obey when obedience costs me? Why should I sacrifice my pleasure to the welfare of others, when that welfare is but a fleeting shadow? The utilitarian may tell me that virtue is useful to society, but if society itself is doomed to perish, what concern is that to me? The humanitarian may tell me that to love mankind is the noblest of passions, but if mankind be but a passing phenomenon of matter, what reason have I to waste my heart upon it? The very premise of unbelief robs humanity of its dignity, and makes the gospel of progress a mockery. To call man divine when you have declared him mortal dust is to offer him a crown of tinsel in place of the crown of eternity. It is true that noble deeds are done by unbelievers, that art, culture, and philosophy have inspired devotion, that human progress has stirred enthusiasm. But the question is not whether these things may move the heart for a season, but whether they can sustain it for life, whether they can give it the strength to endure, to resist, to conquer despair. Religion did this, and it did it because it appealed to the eternal. It told man that his soul was immortal, that his acts were registered in heaven, that his sufferings were not in vain. It gave to duty an authority, to sacrifice a meaning, to sorrow a hope. It transformed weakness into strength and death into victory. Take away this, and art may still please the eye, philosophy may still exercise the mind, progress may still excite the imagination, but the foundation of life is gone. The substitutes are but toys gilded with rhetoric, powerless to bear the weight of existence. Let us press the argument further. If art, culture, and progress are sufficient, why is it that those who most loudly proclaim their sufficiency are themselves the least content? Why is it that the men of letters, the philosophers, the apostles of humanity, so often betray the weariness of their creed, and confess in moments of sincerity that life without God is a burden? Their writings abound in contradictions. Their optimism is belied by their despair. They sing hymns to progress, and yet they lament the emptiness of life. They talk of the dignity of man, and yet they declare him the child of accident. They glorify humanity, and yet they describe it as a bubble on the stream of time. Their very eloquence is the measure of their misery, their very enthusiasm the protest of their heart against their reason. They cannot live by the creed they profess, and their lives are the refutation of their philosophy. The truth is that man is so constituted that he demands more than substitutes. His heart cries for eternity, his conscience for authority, his soul for God. You may silence the preacher. You may close the church. You may declare immortality a dream, but you cannot extinguish the hunger of the spirit. It returns with every sorrow, with every wrong, with every death. It returns when art has lost its charm, when philosophy has ceased to amuse, when progress has disappointed. It returns in the silence of the night, in the presence of the grave, in the hour of temptation. And when it returns, the false substitutes are revealed in their impotence, and the soul is left to confess that without God life is not worth living. Therefore, the collapse of belief has not been repaired by these new gospels. They may adorn the surface of life, but they cannot penetrate its depths. They may provide distractions, but they cannot provide foundations. They may amuse the prosperous, but they cannot console the afflicted. They may inspire for a moment, but they cannot sustain for eternity. They are the flowers cast upon a coffin, beautiful indeed, but powerless to give life to the dead beneath. And the coffin is life itself when faith has departed. It is not with bitterness that I write this, but with the solemnity of one who sees the peril of his age. For men are being lulled with fair phrases, while the very meaning of existence is slipping from their grasp. They are told that art, philosophy, and progress are enough, and they believe it until sorrow undeceives them. Then the illusions vanish, and they find themselves face to face with despair. Better would it be to confess at once the emptiness of unbelief than to be deceived by its rhetoric. Better to acknowledge that without God life has no worth than to pretend that substitutes can give what only faith bestows. For in such confession lies the hope of recovery. The soul that has tasted the bitterness of substitutes may yet return to the fountain of life. But the soul that continues to deceive itself with phrases, that clings to illusions while denying truth, is in danger of perishing in its own falsehood. Thus the examination of these substitutes brings us to the same conclusion to which the collapse of belief had already pointed. Without God, without immortality, without revelation, life is stripped of its meaning. The substitutes offered are but shadows, and the worth of existence cannot be maintained by shadows. The question therefore remains, not whether art, culture, or progress can suffice, but whether the old faith, so long despised, must not be reconsidered. For if life is worth living at all, it must be because it is rooted in eternity, because it is sustained by God, because it is redeemed by hope. Until that is acknowledged, the substitutes will continue to glitter and to fail, and the soul will continue to hunger and to despair. If the loftier substitutes for religion, such as art, culture, and human progress, are found insufficient to sustain the weight of life, it is still said that there remain simpler and more tangible motives. Man, we are assured, does not need eternity to make existence worth the while. He may find all the inducements he requires in the pursuit of pleasure, in the accumulation of wealth, in the discharge of those offices which bind him to society. To eat, to drink, to rejoice in the senses, to be surrounded by comfort, to be honored by our fellows, to leave behind us a fair name and perhaps some monument of our labor. These things, it is urged, are surely enough to make life not only tolerable but desirable. If we are denied the eternal, let us make the most of the temporal. If heaven be a dream, let us plant our feet more firmly upon earth. If immortality be a delusion, let us accept with frankness the brief years of our mortality and extract from them all the sweetness they can yield. This is the creed of countless multitudes. It is the creed of the rich man in his palace, and of the poor man in his cottage, of the statesman in the council chamber, and of the youth in the theater. It is expressed in the gaieties of society, in the toil of commerce, in the ambition of politics, in the pleasures of sense. It is expressed with frank cynicism by some, and with unconscious acquiescence by others. Yet, when we examine this creed with the same severity with which we examined the loftier substitutes, we discover that it also rests upon illusions, and that it also, when pursued to its end, leaves life stripped of all real worth. Let us begin with pleasure. The senses give delight, and the world is full of objects to gratify them. The beauty of form and color, the savor of food, the thrill of music, the embrace of love, these things appeal directly and powerfully, and it seems as though the sum of them must make existence rich. But pleasure has two defects which no philosophy can cure. The first is that it palls with possession, and the second that it is followed by satiety. The excitement of desire is succeeded by the languor of indulgence, and the very moment of gratification bears within it the seed of weariness. The wine that sparkles at the lips is flat to the taste of the drunkard. The music that once enraptured becomes monotonous when repeated. The passion that once seemed infinite cools into indifference or disgust. The pursuit of pleasure is therefore an endless chase after freshness, and freshness fades with every hour. No man ever found permanent happiness in pleasure, for its law is exhaustion and its goal is emptiness. But even if this were not so, there is another defect yet more fatal. Pleasure is bound by the conditions of our body, and the body is subject to disease, to decay, to death. However carefully we guard it, however delicately we minister to it, pain and weakness intrude, and the senses which were once the channels of delight become the avenues of torment. The very constitution of our being makes it impossible that pleasure should be the end of life. For life includes not only youth and vigor, but age and decrepitude, not only health and joy, but sickness and sorrow. To measure the worth of existence by pleasure is therefore to make it depend upon what it cannot permanently supply, and to make happiness a flower that withers at the first breath of winter. Let us turn to wealth. The possession of riches is the dream of multitudes, for it promises to bring with it not only the means of pleasure, but also security, power, and consideration. To command labor, to surround oneself with luxury, to silence anxiety by abundance, to gratify the desires of the moment, and to anticipate the desires of the future. These are the attractions of gold. Yet wealth, like pleasure, deceives. It promises more than it can give, and what it does give is tainted with anxiety. The rich man has cares that the poor man knows not. His possessions are a burden to defend. His gains are embittered by fear of loss. His ambition grows with every success, and satisfaction retreats as his fortune advances. The more he has, the more he desires, and the distance between him and content is never diminished. Moreover, wealth, like pleasure, is bound by the limits of life. The grave mocks at the treasures of the millionaire, and death makes the beggar and the banker equal. The folly of heaping up riches for heirs who may squander them, for strangers who may mock at them, is apparent to the calm observer, and yet men pursue wealth as though it were eternal, only to find at last that it has bought them everything but peace. There remains social utility, the performance of duty to the community, the cultivation of those virtues which make society possible, the pursuit of honor and reputation among men. Here, it may be said, we have something nobler than the pursuit of pleasure or of wealth. To live usefully, to serve one's country, to labor for one's kind, to be remembered as a benefactor. Surely this gives a dignity to existence that no faith is required to sanction. And indeed, if anything could replace religion, it would be this. For it appeals to motives less selfish, it inspires sacrifices, it exalts the individual above his own narrow circle. Yet when examined by the light of unbelief, it too is found wanting. For why should I sacrifice myself for society if society itself has no destiny? Why should I farrago my comfort, my ambition, my life even, for the sake of a race which is drifting to extinction? If man be mortal dust, why should I wear my strength in his service? If the grave is the end, what is the meaning of honor among men who themselves are but shadows? The utilitarian may tell me that my sacrifice adds to the sum of human happiness. But if that happiness perishes, if the sum itself is wiped out by time, what is gained? The fame of the hero, the gratitude of the people, the monument in the city square. What are these but sounds and stones when the generations that repeat the name are themselves dissolved? Religion gave permanence to virtue by binding it to eternity. Utility robs it of that permanence and leaves it to wither with the grass. Thus, whether we look to pleasure, to wealth, or to social utility, the result is the same. Each may charm for a season, each may sustain in moments of vigor and prosperity, but each fails when the deeper needs of the soul assert themselves. Pleasure cannot console sorrow, wealth cannot bribe death, utility cannot give dignity to extinction. They are but toys in the hands of men who dread to face the truth, and when sorrow or conscience speaks, their insufficiency is manifest. The illusion of happiness through material goals is the most common of all illusions and the most deceptive. For while the loftier substitutes appeal only to the cultivated few, this illusion appeals to all. It is the creed of the market, of the club, of the parlor, of the street. It is the creed that fills the theaters, that drives the commerce, that animates the gossip of the world. And yet beneath it lies the same despair, the same emptiness, the same confession that without God life is not worth living. One need but look at the spectacle of society to see this truth. The wealthy and the gay, the powerful and the admired, are often the very ones who confess their weariness of life. The suicides of the prosperous, the vices of the idle, the discontent of the successful, are witnesses to the vanity of their creed. If pleasure and wealth could make life worth living, these men would be the happiest of mortals. Yet they are often the most miserable, for they have exhausted the fountains which they supposed inexhaustible, and they find themselves athirst. The poor may still dream of wealth, the youth may still dream of pleasure, but the rich and the aged know the vanity of both. And society, in spite of its gaiety, betrays in its ennui the confession that its creed is a lie. Therefore the conclusion is inevitable. Without a transcendent anchor, without God, without immortality, life measured by pleasure, wealth, or utility is fleeting and shallow. It may glitter, but it cannot satisfy, it may amuse, but it cannot console, it may fill the hours, but it cannot justify the years. The worth of life is not in what perishes, but in what endures, not in what is temporal, but in what is eternal. And until this is confessed, men will continue to pursue illusions, to grasp at shadows, to weary themselves with what cannot satisfy. The pursuit of pleasure, wealth, and utility without faith is but a circle that returns forever to the point from which it set out, and the traveler at last is compelled to ask whether the road itself is worth the toil. If in all the substitutes we have considered there has been discovered nothing but illusion, if art and culture, philosophy and progress, pleasure and wealth and utility, alike fail to give to man any permanent reason for existence, then we are driven back to the faith which they have sought to displace. And when we turn again to that faith, not as tradition merely, but as reason and necessity compel us, we find that it offers precisely what the heart requires and what the intellect itself, when honest, cannot repudiate. For religion, and in particular that religion which has fashioned the conscience and history of Europe, is not a superfluity but a foundation, not an ornament of life, but its very base. Christianity, with its belief in God, in conscience as his voice, in immortality as the destiny of man, gives coherence to morality, dignity to sacrifice, and hope to sorrow. It is this which makes life more than a pageant of atoms, more than a struggle of appetites, more than a tragedy ending in dust. The necessity of faith appears first when we examine morality. We have seen that without God morality loses its authority and becomes but a convention or a convenience. Duty, which speaks with majesty when conceived as the command of heaven, becomes but a whisper of habit when reduced to instinct. Sacrifice, which is noble when offered to the eternal, becomes folly when offered to a phantom. Yet conscience persists. Men feel within them a voice that approves and condemns, a law that commands even when it costs them pain. This voice, if not divine, is inexplicable. It cannot be the echo of utility, for it often bids a man act against utility. It cannot be the fruit of instinct, for it often bids him resist instinct. It cannot be the cry of society, for it often bids him resist society. It speaks with an authority that no human tribunal can equal, and it binds the will with chains which no logic of expediency can forge. The recognition of God alone explains this fact. The belief that conscience is his voice, that duty is his command, gives morality a foundation that nothing else can give. Without this, virtue is a shadow. With it, virtue is the very likeness of God, nor is morality alone thus dependent. Purpose also is without coherence unless faith supplies it. The schemes of philosophy and progress we have already seen to be illusions because they are bounded by time. But religion stretches beyond time and gives to purpose an eternal horizon. To labor for God is not to labor for a race that perishes, but for a kingdom that endures. To obey his will is not to obey a convention that may change, but to obey a law immutable as himself. To strive for his approval is not to seek the applause of men who forget, but the approbation of one who remembers forever. Purpose thus takes its true grandeur only when it is bound up with the eternal. Without this, it shrinks into a pursuit of phantoms. With this, it expands into a vocation divine. And hope. What becomes of hope without religion? Hope is the crown of human life, the light that shines upon its darkness, the star that guides it through its storms. But hope without immortality is but a candle in the wind. The hope of pleasure fails, the hope of wealth fails, the hope of progress fails, for all alike are bounded by death. The tomb extinguishes them as surely as it extinguishes the body. But the hope of religion is not bounded by death, it triumphs over it. It tells us that love shall not be lost, that sacrifice shall not be forgotten, that sorrow shall be turned into joy. It lifts the mourner's eyes above the grave, and shows him his dead not vanished, but gone before. It tells the sufferer that his pain is not in vain, but that it works out for him a weight of glory. It tells the saint that his purity is not wasted, but that it shall shine like the stars forever. Such hope gives to life a meaning that nothing else can give. It makes the transient bear the seal of the eternal. It makes the dust luminous with heaven. It is sometimes said that such belief is but a dream, a solace invented by weakness, a myth to console the ignorant. But the very grandeur of the belief refutes such a sneer. For if it be a dream, it is a dream nobler than the waking thoughts of philosophy. If it be a myth, it is a myth that has created the highest virtues of mankind, that has inspired the martyrs, that has built the cathedrals, that has purified the homes, that has given laws their sanctity and nations their dignity. Can a lie create what is noblest and best? Can an illusion sustain through centuries the loftiest acts of heroism and the purest forms of love? The argument of history is itself the argument of faith. For wherever Christianity has reigned, their life has shown its worth, and wherever it has declined, their life has confessed its emptiness. The critics of faith forget also that their own philosophy borrows from the very religion it denies. When they speak of duty, they borrow the language of the conscience trained by Christianity. When they speak of progress, they borrow the hope created by Christianity. When they speak of humanity, they borrow the dignity with which Christianity invested man as the child of God. Their very protests are parasitic. They live upon the capital of faith even while they repudiate its authority. Tear away the root, and the borrowed leaves wither. Destroy the creed, and the morality, the progress, the humanity shrivel into dust. Religion then is not only useful but necessary. It is necessary not because men are ignorant, but because men are moral, not because they are weak, but because they are great. For the greatness of man is precisely that he cannot be satisfied with less than eternity. His conscience demands a law absolute. His heart demands a love eternal. His soul demands a destiny infinite. These demands are not delusions, they are the very constitution of his being. And the faith that meets them is therefore not an invention but a revelation, not a dream but a reality. To deny it is not to be rational, but to mutilate reason, not to be enlightened, but to darken counsel. The special power of Christianity lies in this, that it not only affirms God and immortality, but it reveals them in a form that meets the heart of man. For it does not leave God as a vague abstraction, nor immortality as a cold speculation. It brings God near in the person of Christ, and it makes immortality sure in his resurrection. It shows us duty not as a law written on tables of stone, but as a life lived in flesh and blood. It shows us sacrifice not as a theory, but as a cross upon which love bore agony. It shows us hope not as a conjecture, but as a promise sealed by victory over death. Christianity thus incarnates the very truths that reason demands, and gives them warmth, power, and certainty. It is religion not in cloud, but in reality, not in dream but in fact. The world may sneer at miracles, but the greatest miracle of all is Christianity itself. That a faith preached by fishermen should conquer Rome, that a creed of the cross should subdue the sword, that doctrines of humility and purity should transform barbarians into nations, that prayers whispered in catacombs should resound in cathedrals, that words spoken on a hillside in Galilee should outlast empires and philosophies. This is itself the standing miracle which unbelief cannot explain. And it is a miracle not of force but of faith, not of violence but of truth. Christianity has lived because it answers the needs of life, because it gives worth where nothing else can give it, because it makes existence not only endurable but divine. Consider again the test of sorrow. All substitutes for religion fail here. Art cannot comfort the bereaved, wealth cannot buy back the dead, progress cannot promise reunion, but Christianity speaks and sorrow is transformed. The tears remain, but behind them shines the rainbow of hope. The heart is broken, but it is broken that it may be healed. The grave is dark, but beyond it is the dawn of immortality. This is not rhetoric, it is experience. The poor in their cottages, the dying on their beds, the mourners by their coffins, have found it true for centuries, and they find it true still. If religion were false, could it thus console generation after generation, century after century? If it were illusion, could it thus sustain not the ignorant only but the wise, not the weak only but the strong? Illusion cannot bear such fruit. Only truth can, and what of death itself, the great test of all? Without religion, death is the end, the annihilation of personality, the mockery of all labor, the silencing of all love. With religion, death is a passage, a birth into fuller life, the opening of eternity. Which of these is worthy of man? Which makes life worth living? The creed of unbelief ends in despair, the creed of faith ends in triumph. The one leaves man lower than the beasts, for they at least are unconscious of their fate. The other lifts him higher than the angels, for it gives him victory through struggle and glory through suffering. The choice is clear, and reason as well as heart declares for faith. Thus, when we re-center the discussion on Christianity and belief in immortality, we find not a dream but a necessity, not a superfluity, but the very foundation of life. Faith gives coherence to morality, purpose to existence, hope to sorrow. It unites the fragments of life into a whole, it binds the transient to the eternal, it crowns man's dignity with destiny. Without it, life is not worth living. With it, life becomes not only worth living but worth sacrificing, worth suffering, worth dying for. The argument is not merely theological, it is existential. It is the argument of the conscience, of history, of experience, of the very constitution of the soul. And it leads us with irresistible force to the conclusion that in religion, and in Christianity supremely, is found the true source of meaning in life. We have traveled a long road of inquiry, beginning with the confidence of an age which has proclaimed the death of faith, passing through the pretended consolations that seek to take its place, and confronting at last the question which lies at the root of all. The question whether life stripped of religion retains any real worth. We have examined the substitutes offered in turn, the visions of art and culture, the reasonings of philosophy, the dreams of human progress, the pursuits of pleasure, wealth, and social utility. We have asked of each not whether it charms for a moment, but whether it satisfies forever, not whether it pleases the imagination, but whether it sustains the will, not whether it adorns life, but whether it justifies it. And from each alike we have received the same answer, sometimes spoken plainly, sometimes disguised beneath eloquent phrases, that without God and immortality, without duty rooted in eternity and hope crowned by heaven, life is a pageant of shadows, a labor without meaning, a desire without end, a tragedy without redemption. We have seen that art and culture may refine the senses and delight the mind, but they cannot command the conscience nor console the mourner. We have seen that philosophy may amuse the leisure of the learned, but it cannot supply authority to virtue nor hope to sorrow. We have seen that progress and humanity may stimulate generous enthusiasm, but they cannot justify self-sacrifice when both the giver and the race alike are drifting to extinction. We have seen that pleasure palls, that wealth deceives, that utility without eternity loses its dignity. We have seen that the very men who proclaim these things sufficient betray in their wariness and contradictions the confession of their insufficiency. And thus at the end of the analysis, we find ourselves face to face with the ancient faith, which we had been told was outworn, and compelled to ask whether it is not rather indispensable, whether it is not the very foundation which alone can make life worth living. For faith, and in particular the Christian faith, gives to life what nothing else can give. It gives coherence to morality by revealing duty as the command of God and conscience as His voice. It gives purpose to existence by linking the labor of time with the destiny of eternity. It gives hope to sorrow by promising that what is lost shall be restored, that what is suffered shall be rewarded, that what is sown in tears shall be reaped in joy. It dignifies sacrifice by assuring that it is not wasted. It ennobles virtue by making it a likeness of the divine. It redeems death itself by transforming it from an end into a beginning. In a word, it makes existence not only tolerable but triumphant, not only worth living but worth dying for. This is not a conclusion reached by mere sentiment, but by reason compelled to honesty. For the question whether life is worth living is not answered by phrases of optimism, by hymns to humanity, by the pursuit of pleasures or the accumulation of wealth. It is answered only by that which can meet the deepest demands of the soul. Its demand for an authority absolute, for a love eternal, for a destiny infinite. These demands are not illusions. They are the very structure of our being. They return in sorrow, in wrong, in death, in the silence of our own hearts. We may deny them, but we cannot extinguish them. And the faith that meets them is therefore not a dream, but a necessity. To call it illusion is to call man himself a delusion, to call his conscience a falsehood and his hope a lie. The final answer, then, is clear. Life without religion is not truly worth living. It may glitter with pleasures and be filled with occupations, but its foundation is sand. It may be adorned with art and guided by knowledge, but its heart is empty. It may labor for humanity and boast of progress, but it drifts without a goal and ends in despair. Only faith gives to it a center, a direction, a crown. Only faith binds the transient to the eternal and fills the fleeting hours with meaning that survives them. only faith makes duty more than a habit, sacrifice more than a folly, sorrow more than a curse, death more than annihilation. Without it man is less than his own heart demands, with it he becomes more than his imagination could conceive. And yet the debate we have considered is not of our age only, but of all ages. The forms of unbelief may change, but the question remains. Each generation is tempted to think that it has outgrown the need of religion, that science or culture or progress will suffice. Each generation discovers at last that it has been deceived, and returns, perhaps reluctantly but inevitably, to the old foundation. For the need is not created by custom, but by nature. It is not a superstition of the past, but a law of the soul. As long as man is man, as long as conscience speaks and death awaits, the question will return, and the answer will be the same: that life without God is not worth living, and that faith is the necessary ground of human dignity and purpose. It is for this reason that the issue matters beyond our own time. For if the loss of faith is indeed the loss of life's worth, then the future of civilization depends upon its recovery. The virtues which have made society possible, the hopes which have sustained its struggles, the ideals which have lifted it above barbarism, are all rooted in religion. Sever them from that root, and they wither. Preserve the root, and they bloom anew. It is not by rhetoric, but by reality that this is proved. History is the witness, experience is the witness, conscience is the witness. The decline of faith has always been the decline of virtue, and its revival has always been the revival of hope. The question whether life is worth living is therefore not a question for philosophers only but for nations, for the destiny of mankind. Thus at the close of our inquiry we return not to paradox, but to simplicity. The old faith, so long derided, so often proclaimed dead, remains the one power that can make life coherent, dignified, and hopeful. Without it man wanders among illusions, with it he walks in truth. Without it he clutches at shadows, with it he grasps reality. Without it he is a creature of appetite and chance, with it he is a child of God and an heir of immortality. This is not only the conclusion of argument, but the confession of experience, the testimony of the ages, the voice of the human soul. If then we would answer the question with sincerity, if we would face without evasion the problem which our age has raised, we must confess that the worth of life depends upon faith, and that in losing faith, we lose not a luxury, but a necessity. For life is not a puzzle to be solved by cleverness, it is a destiny to be fulfilled by devotion. It is not a toy for pleasure, it is a trust for eternity. It is not an accident of atoms, it is a calling from God. And only when it is seen thus does it show its meaning, only when it is lived thus does it show its worth. This, then, is the final word. Life is worth living when it is rooted in God, when it is guided by His will, when it is inspired by His promise. Apart from this, it is not truly life but only existence, a restless journey from birth to death, from nothingness to nothingness. In Him alone it finds its origin, its law, its goal. In Him alone it becomes what the heart has always dreamed and the conscience has always commanded. In Him alone the shadows pass and the substance remains. In Him alone the riddle is solved and the tragedy redeemed. And in Him alone the question that has haunted our inquiry receives its only answer. Yes, life is worth living, because it is not bounded by death, but crowned by immortality, not the play of chance but the work of God, not a pageant of dust, but a pilgrimage to eternity.